black by popular demand. Once again, it's that great American, that great economist, an all-around nice guy. Not to mention America's heartthrob.
Oh, Walter.
Walter E. Williams.
That's right, Johnny Donovan. America's heartthrob. Right on. We have today a special guest, Professor Jennifer Roback. She's a research fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University and author of numerous articles in scholarly and popular journals. She got her degree at Rochester, PhD at Rochester University, which is a couple notches below UCLA, I must say. And she was at George Mason University under my supervision for a number of years when I was department chairman, but she saw fit to leave. Welcome to the show, Jennifer.
Hey, nice to be back, Walter.
Now, you wrote a book, Love and Economics, and the subtitle, which I think is very good, Why the Laissez-Faire Family Does Not Work. Now, why the title?
Well, the title, of course, indicates the two things that I'm most interested in, which is love and economics. Love as a mother of two, and economics as my profession, as you've indicated, Walter.
Mm-hmm.
But the subtitle, Why the Laissez-Faire Family Doesn't Work, is meant to be sort of a surprise for people, to indicate that even though laissez-faire works perfectly fine in the free market, it really doesn't work to apply similar kinds of leave-us-alone principles in the family. And what I mean to do in this book is to show that why the family isn't a contract, for instance, why viewing other people in terms of what they do for me is not the best way to view your family members, and to basically view the family as something where every member is out for himself, maximizing their own self-interest, and somehow, as if by an invisible hand, everything will all work out.
No. Well, you know,
that's what I tried to do in my family, and this is how I tell you I'm an expert on things that don't work, because I've tried all these harebrained things.
Well, that's why I'm an expert of things that work, because I run my family. See, I run my family on a communist basis. You know, from each according to their abilities and to each according to their needs.
I've heard that, Walter, that you run your family that way.
Now, let me ask
you. How does it work out? Explain to everybody how that works out.
Oh, it works out fine. We've been married 42 years, and it works out, and I'm still the boss, I think.
Walter, she lets you think that. I think we're probably closer to the truth.
Now, okay. Now, there are a couple of questions that I want to ask you. Well, you know, there's a lot of people who say, well, we think housewives ought to get paid.
Yes.
You ought to get paid for being a mom. You're a mom, right?
That's right.
You ought to be paid for being a mom.
That's right.
And the government ought to do it.
That's right. That's the newest thing coming from the feminists who, and what I say about that is that would be the final blow to bureaucratizing the family. It would be the last step in turning the family from a personal institution into a bureaucratic and politicized institution. I think it would be a disaster all the way around. What I say is, see, the alternative, we're used to thinking of, if it's not laissez-faire, it must be government, see. And what I say is the alternative here is to have a family based on love, which is what it sounds like goes on in your family. Based on love, not on either politics or money or any of these other kinds of...
Well, isn't that kind of the history of families?
Yes, that's right. That's what... See, it used to be that the family was always considered the most basic institution because it's a natural institution. It replenishes itself, completely anarchistic in the usual way that we economists think about it, right? Everything happens because of spontaneous attraction between the two adults, and then they sort of spontaneously create a community around themselves. And so it is a natural and self-sustaining kind of social institution. But what's happened is that the family has been broken apart by political forces and economic forces. And so the family is very fragile today, and a lot of people are saying, well, you know, we don't need the family. I, as a woman, can go off all by myself and have a child by myself, and I don't need a husband, I don't need a man, I can do this all on my own. Well, the only reason you think you can do it all on your own is because you have either the government to bail you out through welfare, or you have commercial relationships to help you out. Namely, you have a job to bring in money, and you have a daycare provider whom you pay. Well, happening with that, Walter, is that we are substituting personal relationships. We're getting rid of the personal family relationships and replacing them with either government things or commercial transactions.
Well,
I say that's a disaster for everybody.
And I think I don't like to believe in conspiracies, but there's somewhat a driving force behind this, is because if you are for big government, there's at least one thing that you want, that is you want people's allegiance to be to you, to the state. If you're trying to have a client state, you want people's allegiance to be the state, and rather than to the family. So you have some incentives to contribute towards the breakup of families.
Well, so you're absolutely right. If you look at who supports what kinds of things, that's the best way to make sense of what's going on. In other words, if you fragment the family, then the people are going to be more dependent upon the state necessarily. And if you look at how people vote, the so-called gender gap in politics is not a gender gap at all. It's a marriage gap. Mm-hmm. Women who are married with children tend to vote Republican. Women who are single mothers, for whatever reason, tend to vote Democratic. Well, the state is becoming their substitute spouse, is what's happening. And so, and furthermore, if you look at some of the things people say, they'll say, in married life, I should be allowed to do anything I want. I should be able to get married if I want to, get divorced if I want to. If I want to marry 3 guys and a dog, that should be up to me. It's all contract. Well, those same people who talk like that it's all up to the consumer of marriage to define what it is, they'd never say that about racial discrimination.
Yeah, right.
They'd never say that about Fair Labor Act. They'd never say if the employer and employee want to agree to 10 cents an hour that should be fine.
Well, that's like two women or 2 men saying that they're getting married, and they want you to recognize their marriage. Well,
right.
I can just say, well, you should recognize me as the Queen of Sheba. I mean, I can call myself, but that doesn't mean that you have to recognize me as such.
That's right.
Now, a lot of people say, well, look, the family, women being tied to motherhood and the house and things like this. I mean, this is stifling to women. This is demeaning to women. This is putting women under the control of men.
Yes.
How do you respond to that?
Okay. Well, first of all, you have to. What we've done, Walter, in this country is we've redefined what freedom means, and you put your finger right on it there. We now believe that freedom means to be completely unburdened or unconnected with any human relationship. That if I'm encumbered with a human relationship, I'm no longer free. So if I'm dependent on a man financially, I'm not free. If I have to take care of a child, I'm not free. Mm-hmm. If I have to give birth to a child, I'm not free. Mm-hmm. So we've redefined freedom to mean being completely unencumbered by any kind of human relationship. And what I say about that is that understanding of freedom is incoherent at the social level, and it's inhuman at the personal level, because in point of fact, nobody wants to live that way. We think we want to live that way when our relatives are being a pain in the neck, mm-hmm. Which they always will be some of the time, Mm-hmm. But the reality is that our greatest happiness comes from our human relationships, mm-hmm. and that dealing with the problems of other people, coping with the other people in our family, that is part of how we grow up.
Yeah.
Marching away in a huff whenever things don't go the way we want, that's not how we mature. That's not how we grow up. That's how 2-year-olds act.
Yeah.
And that's not a recipe for long-term happiness.
Now, a lot of people will say, or some people will say, well, women can, work, and they can have a career, and their children, they're raising the children will not be compromised because the women will give the children quality time on the weekends.
Well, I think a lot of people who have tried to do that have found out that really doesn't work. The quantity time is quality time, in effect. And that what happens is that when you come home from work, you're worn out. Mm-hmm. And so you've already given your best quality time of the day to your employer mm-hmm. or to the commute. And by the time you get home, it's a mad scramble to just mm-hmm. do the bare minimum maintenance things.
And then also when a kid comes home at 2:30 in the afternoon, something that has happened to him, he needs his mother now,
right?
Not on the weekend when she can give him quality time.
That's right. And the interesting thing is that as the kids get older, they need you more in that very way that you described. When they're babies, mm-hmm. they need a lot of hands-on care. And they get older and they can walk around, they can do all their stuff on their own. But they might need you anytime, And they don't need you all the time, but they might need you anytime. And so I think it's very misleading to think that we can compartmentalize our lives like that.
Yeah, right.
Well, I have a couple hours set aside to deal with whatever might come up. Well, and it's not just with kids, too. Think about when your parents grow old, somebody needs to help out with the parents. So if you have your life set up so that you've got 2.5 jobs, two-career couple typically has 2.5 jobs, there's no slack in the system. If anything goes wrong, it's a lot of strain for everyone. And so I have found by going part-time that it improved the quality of my life immeasurably by doing that. I mean, I was full-time when we were colleagues there at Mason. And I was trying to do a full-time job in part-time hours, which was very stressful.
Which is very, very hard. Can you hang on? We have to go make some money, and we'll be back with some of your calls for Professor Roback after this. Folks, we're back this last day of the week with Professor Jennifer Roback, a former colleague of mine. We're talking about her book, Love and Economics, which is published by Spence Publishing Company, and you can contact them and get a copy. And it's very worthwhile reading. And by the way, Jennifer Roback was she was on the PhD written exams. She started with me, and I miss your company on those exams.
Well, thank you, Walter. I miss you, too. We had a lot of fun, didn't we?
Yes, right.
Terrorizing graduate students.
Right. Asking them questions that I used to ask questions that I didn't know the answer to.
Well, it's a good way to find out stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, right. Let's welcome Walter from Ridgefield, Connecticut. You're on with Professor Roback.
Well, what an honor, Professor Roback and Dr. Williams. And not only are you the greatest mind of the 21st century, but you got a great first name. So.
Okay. Okay, Walter.
Professor Roback, you remember you talked me into running for governor of Connecticut back in 1982.
I remember you, Walter.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
Is it appropriate to ask how Rob is, or is it?
Oh, you can do that.
He's fine. My husband's fine. We have 2 kids.
I heard that.
This is part of the book. This is the fact that's how
great.
We got these 2 kids.
Okay, look.
Listen,
it's not all home week, Walter. Ask the question.
I'm going to get the book, believe me, but I'm so delighted that you brought up this issue because for years I have felt that the state is the natural enemy of the family and vice versa. I mean, you can take any example you want. If Uncle Seth is indigent and the family's helping to support him, they're against higher taxes because they need that money to help Uncle Seth. But if he's being cared for by the government, now all these family members are against lowering taxes. They want the taxes even higher so that Uncle Seth can live better. So,
and you might also say that, well, Jennifer was saying when we were going in the break, we were saying that, well, we have a responsibility towards our parents because, surely they had a responsibility towards us. And you kind of wonder, how come people don't honor their mother and fathers as the biblical admonition so much as they used to?
Absolutely right.
Well, the reason why is that I believe is that people can get me to honor their mother and father through the tax code.
Yeah, exactly.
And I personally think my mother's 91, and I take care of her. I'm not asking anybody else to look after her.
That's right.
Because that's my responsibility.
Well, it's one of the best arguments I know for limited government because the bigger government gets, the less likely it is that families can do their internal obligations well.
And then another reason, Jennifer, a lot of people will say, well, look, one of the reasons why many women are out of the household is because it requires a woman's salary to pay the taxes.
Well, you know what? They never say it that way, Walter. They always say women have to work. And you and I are the ones who have to point out that they have to work in order to pay the tax bill because the tax bill is the biggest single bill that that the median income family faces. The median income household pays about 40% of its income in taxes.
And that exceeds the amount of money they spend on clothing, shelter, and food.
That's right. And so that secondary earner is basically working for the government. And that's what we need to keep in mind when we hear people saying, let's pay mothers to stay home and take care of their kids. Where's that money going to come from?
That's right. Absolutely.
Right.
Scott's on from Lansing, Michigan. Welcome to the show, Scott. You're on with Jennifer Roback.
Thank you very much. I wanted to just highlight the role of the family as a bulwark against the state. and the baleful legacy of 20th century social worker radicalism in undermining the family, Christopher Lasch had a famous book called Haven in a Heartless World. Ferdinand Mount had a book called The Subversive Family. And in both cases, the family, over the centuries, has resisted ideology, religious reformers, ascetics, Puritans. It's always been its own island. And ever since, say, the turn of the century, of the last century, with sort of blue-nosed social workers taking immigrant children from their families, and now the children's rights movement that culminated in things like Hillary Clinton's It Takes a Village, you see the state driving a wedge into the family in the name of utopian social engineering.
Yes, that's right. We want to respond to that, Jennifer?
Well, yes, I think the key issue here is that we're viewing the family as something that passes out resources from one person to another. And if the state can move in and substitute the resources, then everything will be well. But what we forget is that the primary business of the family is to build up relationships.
That's right.
So that if grandma's being taken care of by an impersonal person who's being paid for with money from the state, that means that we're less personally involved. If you have your child in state-subsidized daycare, that means you're less involved as a person. If the state is providing schooling, and at school they teach the kids how to brush the teeth and all these other things by saying, well, they're not going to learn it at home, so we have to do it at school, you're pushing the family further and further out of the loop with every one of those kinds of steps, and it undermines the family's ability to create relationships.
That's
so
right.
That's the key thing.
Well, look, Jennifer, you've done a wonderful job with this book. Now, where can people best get your book?
The best place to get it is to log on to www.spencepublishing.com. And I say that because this is a family business. You can really support free enterprise by going directly to the publisher. And they will give you a discount. They'll give you a 50% discount if you log on and tell them you heard it on Rush's show.
Okay.
Or you can call the publisher, and their toll-free number is 888-773-6782, which spells out Ben Pub. So they can get it either of those ways.
Before we have to let you go, we're up against the clock. What are you working on now?
I'm working on explaining further why we need the family to support the Free Society, why you have to have the family and the Free Society going hand in glove to work together.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thanks a lot, Jennifer, for coming on and enlightening us about the family.
Thanks very much, Walter.
We'll be back with your calls after this, but keep in mind a very, very important thing. Kids, particularly boys, are born barbarians, and you need families to cure them of that before we release them to the rest of society. We're back, and we were just on with Professor Jennifer Roback talking about love and economics, and that just proves something. That we economists, we can talk about anything. That is, we can bring economic analysis to anything. That is, we are, I guess, my colleague Jim Buchanan, Nobel laureate at George Mason University, he used to refer to us, or he has referred to us as, I don't know whether he said intellectual imperialist or academic imperialist. I think it was intellectual imperialist. That is because you can apply economic theory to any situation where there are costs of doing something and there are benefits of doing something. You can always apply economics to that. Let's go to Sean in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dr. Williams. That was a great last segment. I think I'll pick up the professor's book, but I'd like to get back to the organ market, if you will. I'm a big proponent of the market. I find myself agreeing with you quite frequently, but I think in this case there's something that usurps the free market, and that's human life. I think it's sacrosanct, and I think to allow a market in organs to exist, you allow or you create the incentive for the cheapening of life.
Well, let me ask you a question. Okay, according to Casterman and Andy Barnett, there are something like 20 people. I mean, well, first of all, there are 80,000 Americans on the waiting list for an organ, and there are 20 dying each day because they don't have an organ. Now, which is more cheapening of life? Allowing those 20 people to die, or not allowing a family member to say, well, look, here's a guy who's dead, or father died, or whatever, here's his kidney for $1,000. Which is cheapening of a life more? Allowing those people, let me repeat, allowing those people, those 20 people to die each day. And awful death. It's an awful death. Or to sell an organ. Which is your preference?
I would prefer to save their lives, and I do. I'm an organ donor. But that's my choice after death. I don't have the choice to take my own life, even though it's mine. I own my life to the extent that I can, but I don't have the choice to give that up.
Why not? If it's yours.
I was going to ask you if you were against laws against suicide.
No. Look, if you want to commit suicide, you're standing on a building about to commit suicide. I'd say, hey. Did you really think it over, Sean? And then you say, no, I'm going to commit suicide anyway. I just run downstairs. I say, give me a few minutes to tell people get out of the way. So you won't hurt anybody when you jump. Because, look, the point is, as Professor Casterman said, that is because your sensibilities might be bothered by a person selling a kidney. Somebody, not you, but somebody else selling a kidney. Should we allow somebody to die?
It's not a matter of sensibility. I think it's a matter of basic moral. I mean, there are certain things that we accept as a society that as society-wide morals.
Okay, well, okay,
we
Sean,
can't kill somebody.
Is it okay for me to sell my hair?
I suppose it is, yeah.
Well, that's part of my body.
Sure. Well, I have one rather macabre example, but it drives the point home. If a woman had some terrible affliction such that she only found out, by mistake that she is only able to bear stillborn children, if there was a market for organs, she could make a living out of bringing babies that were not alive to term and selling them because they're alive. They're not alive and they don't have any property rights. The mother, they would default to the mother, and she could sell that child.
Okay.
That just sounds grotesque.
Well, I don't think it's grotesque, and I can understand where it can offend the sensibilities of some people. But how likely is that?
How likely are a lot of things that end up actually happening?
But see, what you really need to do, what some people need to do, is just kind of go and watch these people suffer the painful death, and then as Professor Casterman said, that these numbers are understated because a lot of people they die or they get ill while they're on the waiting list, and then they're too sick for an operation. And see, let me just ask one more thing before we go, because I think this is a very, very important point. There are many things in our lives that are vital. That is, that we don't leave up to donations. That is, food is vital. We don't say, well, that should be donated. Housing is vital. Clothing is vital. But when we need the most urgent thing in our life at some point, namely a kidney, we say, well, we're going to depend on the voluntary system and have all these supply problems. I think that is cruel.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, thanks for calling in, Sean. Let's go to Mike, who wants to change topic. He's from Memphis, Tennessee, and that's a wonderful city. What's that hotel where the ducks walk across?
Peabody.
Yeah, Peabody. Folks, at this hotel, the ducks, they're swimming in the pool, and around 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the ducks get out of the pool and walk in a line over to the elevator and go up the elevator and go to sleep. I guess they do, or somebody cooks them.
Well, one never knows. They won't let you up to see.
I know. Well, welcome to the show, Mike. What's your question?
My question is on the free market works best when unencumbered by government and taxes. Why is the European community becoming more of a threat to our trade status, where most of their economy is socialistic in nature?
Well, how are they becoming a threat to our trade?
Well, I mean, one of the things we talk about is with the merging, I don't know what the proper term would be, but the agreements, the contracts, or the combining of their economies in the European community, all the different nations.
You mean the European Union?
That's it, the European Union, thank you, is becoming a threat to our marketplace over here, is what,
How is it becoming a threat? I mean,
the fact that they'd be stronger and would have to, it would be difficult to compete against all of those combined together than individually.
Oh,
in the world market.
We look, our country, we run circles around people worldwide in the high-tech field. There's no competition. In terms of agricultural output, I mean, we have the capacity to feed the entire world. I mean, and nobody is as efficient in farming as we are. And then, moreover, people are concerned about, they're taking away our markets. They should take away the markets that we have where we are relatively inefficient.
Wasn't the creation of NAFTA because of that?
NAFTA was a so-called free trade agreement.
Correct. In response to the European community.
No, it was not in response to that. The NAFTA is kind of a collusive, semi-free market agreement. One of the reasons why it's not a free market agreement, because a lot of people call it a free trade agreement, is that you do not need 25,000 pages of a law to tell me that I can trade freely with somebody in Canada or Mexico. The real free trade law, you should look at our Constitution, where it says that states cannot erect any barriers to trade. And I think that's something like 17 words. And that's what I would like to see for the NAFTA or the WTO agreement. We'll be back with your calls after this. 7. We're closing out this week, Friday. Tomorrow I'm going to do some biking. And I'm getting ready for this lady that thinks that she can outbike me. And my daughter, too. I think that, when you get older, these teeny boppers come along and they think that they can excel. But I'm going to teach them a thing or two. But in the meantime, let's go to Randy in the cell phone, Woodbridge, Virginia. Welcome.
Afternoon, Dr. Williams. As
Hi.
a former student, it's good to speak with you again.
You were what?
As a former student of yours, it's good to speak with you.
Oh, you were? Oh,
yeah.
What class?
Economics. It was an introductory, I think a 300 level.
Oh, okay, intermediate, micro.
Yeah, intermediate macro, actually.
No, it's micro. I don't teach that macro stuff. I don't believe it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Anyway, directly my question, or I'd like to know your view on how higher education plays a role in the prosperity of the nations. When you took your nations and you said freedom defined their prosperity, how much does higher education play into that? Is freedom a result of higher education? Is higher education a result of freedom? And how does it play into these nations?
Well, I think clearly education increases the productivity of people. Let's say skills in education, any kind of education, whether it's high school education, whether it's learn how to fix a car, whether it's learning how to fix a body. Education increases our productivity. And actually what we look at as education as investment in human capital. That is, when people go to school, they are investing in human capital, how to become more productive in the future. And unfortunately, in our country, we're not doing that well with education. There's a article today from a fellow, Yolanda it's Polish name and does not have a vowel in there, and I have trouble with it. It's Kudryski, and excuse me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly. He's he's an economist for the Federal Reserve Bank, and he was just saying that the educational standards of American workers are likely to become stagnant over the next 20 years, which could restrain economic growth. And I think that Professor Friedman was on with me, and we were talking about that and the kind of things that are necessary to improve the productivity of improve the education and productivity in our country. It's tragic what goes on in some parts of our country. I got an email from a professor. I'm not going to mention the school. I don't want to get the professor in trouble. But she said that a student came to her office, is a black student, and she was wondering why she was failing a course, and the student had a 13 on the ACT test and a 5 in English, and that means that she has roughly a 5th, 6th, or 7th grade level of reading. And here she is in college. And she's a black girl. She went to all-black school, and this happens to be in Alabama. And it's such a betrayal of a student and she graduated from high school with a B average. Now the girl's not going to get a degree in the field that she was talking to this professor about. She's not going to get a degree in that. So you know where she's going to get her degree? From the easiest place on a university to get a degree. And where is that? It's the School of Education. That's where these people are going to educate or to teach our kids, and that's unfortunate. That's happening all over our country, and we have to stop it. And that's happening with all Americans, both black and white. Anyway, sometimes I'm reading blue books. You know, first day of class, here's what I tell my students. Any of you who are going to take my class next semester, I'll probably say the same thing. I tell the students, this is a real college course. You're going to be expected to start sentences off with capital letters and ending them with periods. You're going to have to find a subject, an object, and a verb when you write a sentence. If this is too challenging for you, drop the class. Drop out of my course and go take a Mickey Mouse course. I mean, I get students, and these are middle-class students at George Mason University. Then, fortunately, not PhD students. They're undergrads. And I will get students to spell to use the following interchangeably for cite. Cite the article. They'll say sometimes S-I-T-E, C-I-T-E, S-I-G-H-T. Or I'll say, if the wage is such and such, how many units of labor will be hired? And I've had students spell, instead of even looking on the exam to get the right spelling, the firm will hire, and it's spelled H-I-G-H-E-R. Now, I'll tell these students, I see a blue book with this. I'll take off. I'll take off for spelling. I'll take off for poor sentence structure. And I'll have students say, well, Professor Williams, I don't know why he took off. This is not an English class. I tell them, well, this is English that we're using. I don't know. The quality of education is just going down across the board. By the way, even the brightest kids there's not a large number of bright kids. That is, back in the 1960s, the number of kids today who score 1,400 and above on the SAT is absolutely lower than the number that scored 1,400 on the SAT back in the 60s. And far more students, many more students are taking the SAT. We'll be back with your calls after this.
You're listening to the EIB Network.
We're back back again, pushing back the frontiers of ignorance. And let's go to Bob in Roanoke, Virginia. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Hey, Walter, how are you?
Okay.
I want to throw my weight behind Sean a little bit when he was talking about the value of human life. It seems to me that some things are actually devalued as soon as we put a dollar sign on it. For example, when we talk about...
we put a dollar sign on everything.
Well, I understand that, but when we do so, it seems to me that we devalue some things.
Okay, let me ask you a question.
Well, let me just give you a quick example.
Okay,
One
you have to
would
be quick,
be
yeah.
the marital relations between a husband and wife, which is technically free, is a lot more valuable than the sexual relations that take place between a prostitute and her John.
So?
Well, my point is that it is more valuable. So I think what Sean was attempting to say, and I agree with him, is that when we take human life, which is extremely precious, and we put a dollar sign on some aspect of it, that we run the risk of devaluing that.
Well, look, I think you make a mistake. We do it all the time. That is, if we ask a person, look, what should we set the speed limit on highways, so that there won't be any deaths, highway fatalities at all? Well, I would imagine 5 miles an hour. It would be no deaths on the highway. Well, why don't we? Well, all those lives that would be saved. But they just aren't worth the inconvenience. And so we say the heck with it. So we do put a price on human life, and I want you people who are against selling organs, you should visit a hospital and see these people dying because organ transplants are not available to them. And then, but on the other hand, you don't have to sell your organ, but don't stop me from selling mine. Mine are very, very good and would command a high price, and this is it for this week. Come back next week.